What's up, boxing fans? This is TBE Boxing, back at you again. Today's topic, Jake Paul versus Nate Robinson and Roy Jones versus Mike Tyson. Bigger draw than regular boxing matches. Let's chop it up and see what it's all about.
Got the money for minutes, pretty bitch, gotta show me titties. This is the life that I chose, on the block with the pole, This is the life that I chose, on the block with the pole, That life for riches, That life for riches, Pretty bitch, show me titties, And I got the glazzy run up on me, I'ma make you get it. I'ma make you get it.
What's up, boxing fans? Let's talk some boxing. All right. So, as you know, the Jake Paul, I mean, maybe you might not know, okay? But the Jake Paul versus Nate Robinson fight and the Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones did more than 1 million, over 1.2 million pay-per-view buys, okay? Just think about that for a minute. Now, these were basically exhibition boxing matches, okay? YouTubers and retired boxers fighting, and they're doing better than regular boxing matches that that we're having out there right now. So I mean, what's really going on with that? Okay. I think the problem is that we're not really getting the fights that we want to see in boxing, okay? And at this point in time, I think the people are getting tired of what we're seeing in boxing right now, with fighters not fighting, boxers not making the fights that the people want to see. The fights that the people want to see, they're not getting it, okay? They're getting all these, also ran fights, okay? And I think people are really getting tired of that right now. I mean, people are hungry. We're living in like post-COVID-19 world. Well, not actually post-COVID-19. It's actually COVID-19 world right now. People can't get out like they used to. And they're hungry for content, okay? People are hungry, to see, excitement right now, because they can't get out like they usually were able to do, prior to COVID-19. And as we look at the landscape of boxing, there are many fights that people would like to see that they're not really seeing. One of the biggest fights being Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford. People not seeing that fight, okay? We're not seeing, Canelo Alvarez versus Jamal Charlo. People not getting those fights. We're not seeing Gervonta Davis versus Gary Russell. Okay, people not getting those fights. Okay, I mean, I can go on and on. Okay, many of the fights that people want to see, they're not getting it. And a lot of reasons why, but there are many reasons why, but I think that some of the contributing factors to things like that, some of these guys out there now on YouTube, so-called commentators, out there making excuses for why fights shouldn't happen. Okay, I mean, it's unprecedented in boxing that you actually have people going out there and making video after video about why we shouldn't get certain fights just because they got some favorite fighter, or they're nut hugging some other fighter, and so they're going on YouTube, and some of these guys have huge audiences. Okay, they have huge audiences out there, 50,000 subscribers and things like that, and they're going on their platform every day, making excuses why certain fights shouldn't happen. This guy's a bigger star, this guy should take less here. I mean, just nonsense, really, okay? And so these guys, insert themselves, between these fighters and, pushing these fights away, just because of you know, they like a fighter or this fighter or that fighter. So I mean, you know, it's unprecedented right now what's going on in boxing, and you know, like I said, these guys are out there making excuses why certain fights shouldn't happen, and so what we are seeing now is that people really want to see these fights. Okay, I mean the Crawford versus Spence fight is $1 million pay-per-view buy fight. If it was able to happen, and there will be at least $1 million pay-per-view for that fight. Okay, but instead these guys are out there talking about, you know, their fighter, that they whatever particular fighter they like in a pay-per-view star. Like for example, you know, Errol Spence. You know, they're talking about he's a pay-per-view star. I mean, these guys putting out 150,000 to 250,000 pay-per-view buys. How are you a pay-per-view star when you only your fight is only drawing 150,000 to 250,000 people, maybe 300,000 if you're lucky? How is that a pay-per-view star when you have YouTubers, okay, like Jake Paul, you know, basketball players like Nate Robinson, Logan Paul, KSI? These guys are drawing 1 million plus pay-per-view. So, you know, what we are seeing that these guys are bigger pay-per-view stars than the actual boxers who have been training all their lives, okay, basically in the sport and dedicate themselves to the sport, and they can't even draw 250,000, 300 people, thousand, or even 400,000 pay-per-view buys because we're not getting the fight that we want to see. Okay, the fight that we want to see will draw a million pay-per-view buys. Okay, but we're not getting those fights, you know. And these guys are comparing themselves to Mayweather, this, that, and the other. I mean, there's no comparison. These guys can't compare themselves to Mayweather, okay? Because Mayweather was giving us the fight that we wanted to see, and he was, you know, routinely doing million plus pay-per-view buys, 800,000, 900,000 pay-per-view buys. So, you know, what we are seeing today, these guys out here on YouTube, you know, giving the boxers license to duck each other, and so we're not really getting the fights that we want to see. And boxing is suffering for that, okay? Okay, boxing is literally suffering because of that type of thing. So, you know, these guys think they're doing something good for boxing. They're not doing anything good for boxing, okay? They're not boxing fans. They're fans of particular fighters, okay? And in that way, when they go out there and make all these excuses as to why fights shouldn't happen, boxing suffers because of that. And we see that happening. So you have guys like Jake Paul, Logan Paul, KSI. These guys are calling out UFC fighters, boxers, basketball players, and these guys are making more money and attracting more eyes, more pay-per-views than actual boxers. Because and what's the medium they're using to do these exhibitions? Boxing. They're using boxing. So that means that people want to see boxing content, but unfortunately, boxers are not really providing the fights that the people actually want to see. And so again, boxing is suffering for that, and the fighters are making, you know, less money. I mean, a fight like, for example, a fight like Errol Spence versus Sean Porter, those guys only made $1.2 to $2 million each for that fight. Okay, I think in that fight, I think they made about $1.5 to $2 million each for that fight, and they had they split the pay-per-view 60-40. Spence getting 60, Porter getting 40%, and so that fight didn't do over 250,000 pay-per-view. Okay, so I mean, we see that, you know, right now, you know, in boxing, it's a critical mass going on right now. We're reaching a watershed moment in boxing, okay? And, you know, we are seeing, you know, UFC on the come up. We're seeing exhibition matches on the come up. And these guys, you know, especially the exhibition guys, they're making more money than actual boxers. It's not so much with the UFC right now, but eventually it's going to get to that point where UFC guys are making more money than boxers, if this kind of trend continues, okay? So, you know, boxing really need to shape up, or they're going to get shipped out, okay? Because at the rate things are going now, you know, boxing are going to continue to lose fans. I mean, you know, because they're not giving the people what they want. I mean, when a boxing match comes on in the UFC, as a matter of fact, when a boxing match and a UFC match clash, boxing have to move. Sometimes have to change their schedule because the UFC is taking away fans from boxing. People going to watch. People watching these UFC fighters. These guys are getting close to million pay-per-view buys when you see a good UFC routinely a UFC fight. Okay, 700,000, 800,000, 900,000, while boxers are getting 200,000, 150,000, 175,000. Okay, I mean, at one time boxing was the biggest combat sport there was. Okay, Ali versus Frazier, Foreman versus Ali. Okay, I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard versus Hearns. Okay, Roberto Duran versus Marvin Hagler. Those were the kind of fights that we were getting, and people tuned in and spent money for those fights. Today, we're not getting the fights that we want. We're not getting Errol Spence versus Crawford. We're not, like I said, I repeated. I don't want to repeat myself, but we know the fights that people want right now, but we're not getting those fights. Back in the day, you didn't have YouTubers out there talking about what fights we shouldn't have. There was no such thing. Okay, talking about AJ shouldn't fight Tyson. AJ shouldn't fight Anthony Joshua. Shouldn't fight Tyson Fury. Why? I mean, those are the fights that people want to see. So right now, boxing is at a critical point. Excuse me. Excuse me. In its history, and it doesn't look really good. It doesn't really look good for boxing right now. And unless boxing, get it together, we're gonna have a serious issue. I mean, we're not gonna. I mean, I'm not sure where all this is leading to, but it's not anything good for boxing. That's for sure. Okay, so these guys, these boxing bodies are sanctioning bodies, and these promoters, and they need to make the fights that people want to see, and stop putting these fights off or not making these fights. Stop fighters out there being prima donnas talking about their pay-per-view stars and they should get this or that when they're not even making 300 or 400 pay-per-view buys. They're barely scratching the surface of the pay-per-view market. Okay, while other guys like YouTubers and UFC fighters are taking full advantage because they're making the fights that people want to see. People want to see fights. They want to see good fights. Okay, and in the absence of good fights, they're gonna gravitate toward whatever that's gonna entertain them, whether it's UFC, YouTuber, or exhibition fights. Okay, so you see, like Floyd Mayweather, he's coming out with an exhibition fight against Logan Paul. That fight is gonna make more money than any boxing match that we've seen in the past couple of months. Okay, it's gonna have probably more than 1 million pay-per-view buys. Okay, I mean, and that's Floyd Mayweather, and it probably have about 2 million pay-per-view buys. But even just regular YouTubers like Jake Paul, who has no real boxing history behind him, is drawing million pay-per-view buys and making multi-million dollars. Okay, way more than actual boxers who work and dedicate themselves to the sport is actually making. Okay, and now people could say, oh, wow, that it shouldn't be that way, or whatever. But it is what it is. People want to be entertained, and if boxing is not going to entertain them, if there's going to be a vacuum, then something is going to fill that vacuum. I mean, we live in a media-centric society where media is everything basically right now, and so it's a digital world. So people want. I mean, we have a global audience. Okay, so people want to see these, see the fight, and people have been giving boxing chance after chance after chance to make the right fight, but it's just not happening. Okay, and so we're seeing that like I said, boxers are not making they're not even making as much money as YouTubers now. Okay, can you imagine that? YouTubers are making more money than boxers. Boxing, you have YouTubers who are boxing making more money than actual boxers. Okay, I mean, Jake Paul just offered Conor McGregor $50 million to fight. And more than likely, that fight is going to happen. Who's going to turn down $50 million? Okay, which fighter right now is getting $50 million? The only fighter out there right now is getting close to that kind of money is Canelo Alvarez. Okay, and I think his last fight he got like altogether about $30 million after pay-per-view and and the guaranteed purse. You put that together, I think he got like what maybe $15-20 million guaranteed, and then added the pay-per-view on top of that, and he probably about $25 million he got for that fight. Okay, the rest of the boxers are getting $2 million, $1.5 million, $1 million. I mean, it's crazy right now what's going on in boxing, man. But again, we have to start seeing the fight that we want to see. Boxing is going to take an even bigger hit than it's taking right now. People want to see Crawford versus Spence. They want to see Jamal Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez. Okay, they want to see fights like Gervonta Davis versus Devin Haney. Okay, Gervonta Davis versus Teofimo Lopez, or Teofimo Lopez versus Devin Haney, or Gary Russell Jr. versus Gervonta Davis. These are fights that people want to see, and people are going to pay. People would pay for these fights, but we're not seeing these fights. Okay, we're seeing just lackluster fights. That nobody. I'm not saying. I'm not saying that all the fights are like that, but for the most part, that's what we're getting. We're getting basically lackluster fights that most people don't really want to see. Okay, and the fight that people are demanding, they're not getting it. We're just getting excuses from some of these fighters, and then you have these commentators, so-called YouTube commentators out there, LDBC and other people like that. Phantom Boxing, Blue Blood Sports. These guys are out there making excuses as to why fights shouldn't happen. Okay, they don't want the fights to happen because their fighter their favorite fighter is a pay-per-view star, so he shouldn't have to fight another fighter because the other fighter it should be 70-30 because he's a and these so-called pay-per-view stars are barely not even pushing 400,000 pay-per-view buys. They're routinely doing like 150, 175, 200, 250 1,000 pay-per-view buys. Okay, but they're pay-per-view stars. How are you a pay-per-view star if you're not? Logan Paul, KSI, Jake, these guys are getting million pay-per-view buys. That's pay-per-view star. Those guys are pay-per-view stars. Okay. So unless if these guys want to become legitimate pay-per-view stars, these boxers today, they're gonna have to make the fights that people want to see. It's guaranteed that Errol Spence versus Crawford is a million pay-per-view buy fight, but we're not seeing that fight. Okay, for what? Because you got guys out there making excuses as to why these fights shouldn't happen. The fighters are making excuses why the fights shouldn't happen. So again, boxing, like I said, is at a watershed moment. It looks like boxing, is basically on its way out, really. People, there's more competition out there from the UFC. Now we have all these exhibition matches coming up, and these exhibition matches are not going to be something that's going to go away. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not going to go away. You're going to see more and more of those things now because there's a vacuum in actual boxing right now. Okay, real boxing is not. We're not seeing real boxing anymore. We're like I said, we're seeing fights that we don't want to see, and the fights that we do want to see, we're not seeing it. So there's a vacuum. So something is going to fill that vacuum. Okay, so and we are seeing it happening. As I speak. Okay, you're going to see more of these exhibition matches. Okay, you're going to see more Jake Pauls, more Logan Pauls, more KSIs. Okay, you're going to see more exhibition, and giving credit to Mayweather, he's like at the forefront of that, and he's making his money, because he know what time it is, and so leave it to Mayweather to be at the top, or be at the forefront of this type of movement that we see going on right now. Okay, doing exhibition fights, making way more money than the actual boxers who are dedicating and train themselves their whole life to the sport, okay, and can't even, make crack the 200,000 or 300 or 400,000 pay-per-view ceiling, while these guys exhibition matches are routinely doing over 1 million pay-per-view buys and more. So yeah, it is what it is, man. Boxing got to get its shit together, because if it don't, it's gonna be like a dinosaur. Okay, it's gonna be out the window. Okay, extinct. Okay, and these guys need to really start making the fights that people want to see, or boxing is gonna continue to suffer, and the fighters are not gonna really make any money. Okay, and so it is what it is. But I think I made my point. That's all I have. I'm gonna leave it there. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can see, my videos. I'll be going live soon. So yeah, subscribe to TBE Boxing, check me out. This is TBE Boxing. That's all I have right now. I'm out.